Since it was so long that we'd surfed Jaws and seen it proper, I kind of forgot how freaking perfect of a wave it is.
And it was just super unorganized and massive. So kind of opted to go to Waimea Bay like all the legends in the past did.
The foam ball hits him and he's like fully stretched out, cartwheeling through the barrel.
They're like, what are you riding? And I'm like, oh, 7.6. And they're like, your pipe board?
You know that feeling where you're just like, oh gosh, like this is not gonna end well.
So if they get body checked while I'm doing a backflip off the lip, that's on them.
I had a little off. Yeah, I had to cut a bill off. Yeah, but if we be real though.
All right, we just came off our first giant swell of the season. It was kind of a sleeper. No one really knew how big it was going to be. Some people were saying it was going to be like 6 feet. Turned out being a heck of a lot bigger. And it was one of those rare times that we were split during the big wave session. I was at Jaws. You ended up having a really good session at Waimea. And walk us through your perspective of the swell and the reason why you're on Oahu in the first place.
Yeah, I went to Oahu to compete in the final regional WSL event at Haleiwa. But when it gets too big, they cancel the event and you go big wave surfing. It's hard though because around the holidays, Thanksgiving, it's really kind of hard to get in between the islands. It's extremely expensive, sometimes $200 just to go on a 30-minute flight one direction. But it's also the frequency of flights. They're just booked out. So I was having a hard time, not running away from the comp to go surf Pe'ahi. And this swell was very much a sleeper. It was being under forecasted probably by a lot. I think it ended up peaking at something like, was it 17 feet at 17 seconds, Ridge? Or was it bigger, 19?
On Buoy 1, it was around that, and then Oahu and Maui got up to like 12 at 18, which isn't mega, but it's pretty sizable. It's still delivered.
Yeah, so it got pretty decent, and this is the craziest thing. So like, I made my choice. I was going to compete at Haleiwa, which is like a mini version of Jaws. And during the morning, all of a sudden this rogue set came in, probably the first big set. And we talked about it before, but in the North Shore, the waves get big notoriously fast because there's just no continental shelf. There's nothing holding back all this open ocean energy. It's not being blocked by anywhere either. And this swell, quite west, was 319 degrees, I think, which is perfect for Haleiwa. This set that came in was probably the biggest of the swell, broke from avalanches, which is this big wave that a lot of people tow foil outside of Haleiwa, to Puena Point, which is this big reeling right-hander. A lot of people learn how to surf on the inside. We have Ali'i Beach, which is right in the middle. And then you have the harbor and you have, the deep, deep channel. And the wave broke all the way across the channel, and there's those big giant channel marker red buoys, like massive ones, and it went underwater through a wave and basically cleaned out the entire lineup. So 4 surfers competing, 4 surfers in the channel waiting for their next heat. Everyone broke their leashes. Everyone snapped their boards. The water safety, Hawaiian Water Patrol, was having a hard time getting 8 people out of the water when it was basically like a 20-foot set came in, 20-foot Hawaiian on the outside probably, and in the inside was just doubling up as gnarly as, and gurgly as a wave can get. So they basically called the comp because there wasn't enough support to be able to like handle that many people in the water. And, the current's really strong at Haleiwa. It's notorious for having like, I swear, like a 6-mile-an-hour current where you're just constantly paddling. You're never sitting, especially at that size. You're actually getting swept out to sea until you can catch a wave in. So they canceled that. I couldn't really get back to Maui in time to join you guys. And I figured the swell was going to drop pretty fast the next day. But again, the swell was very under forecasted and it kind of was holding too. And the way you can predict the future is by these outer buoys. You talked about Buoy 1, which is, I don't even know how many miles off of Kauai, but it's
pretty
way
far out there.
Pretty much like way out in the middle of the ocean. Then you got Honolulu Buoy, that's the first Hawaiian island that you can really reference. And then you got Waimea Buoy, which is, where I was. And then you got Powela Buoy, which is outside Pe'ahi. It's so crazy that all the big wave spots, the buoy's like directly in front of. But anyway, basically it came to a point I ran out of time and I had no big wave gun. I had a gut feeling I should have brought one over, but it was the biggest blessing I didn't, because I ended up having a Jerry Lopez pipeline 7.6 meant for the second reef. And I kind of thought that I would be surfing out second reef pipe if it got too big for Haleiwa, but I didn't predict it was going to be this big and it was going to be washing through. So that got the only place to really go and surf was Waimea Bay, because I went and checked sunset and it was just super unorganized and massive and great waves on the inside, like these 10-foot just peeling waves. But you'd take like a 15-footer on the head and, get sucked out to sea and destroyed. So kind of opted to go to Waimea Bay like all the legends in the past did.
Yeah. And so how was it riding a 7.6 out there? It must have been the shortest board out there by like a foot, I'd imagine. I don't know if I've ever heard anybody riding that small of a board on that big of a day there.
Yeah, it was interesting because that was all I really had. I mean, surprisingly on the North Shore, there's not that many big wave guns that are accessible. There might be some old ones that are under people's houses, but they're just like, I feel like my current boards that I've gotten, and this one in particular from Jerry, it's a little wider than a 7.6, typically is, a little bit thicker too. So I was like, at least I can go out there. The Eddie ceremony is coming up in a week. I can go just like get my lineups, get my bearings, and remember what it was like the last Eddie, essentially, and it was already kind of crowded. I would say it still felt pretty small for Waimea compared to the Eddie, but it was still 12 to 15 foot Hawaiian. It was pretty decent size, actually. Later on, seeing the photos, I was like, gosh, it was actually a little bit bigger than I expected, but I just was like, I could probably catch some insiders and I'll dodge the, bigger ones, and I could maybe duck dive. That being said, all of a sudden my mind was just kind of opened up, because what ends up happening is when you're trying to ride these really big waves, there's a point where the wave gets too steep to like turn around at the last second and take off and get that 10-foot board to fit in the curvature of the wave. And what I realized was with a 7.6, I could turn really late, really quick, and I could knife my board and stick it to the wall. And I was taking off considerably later than I ever thought I could take off on these lurchy Waimea waves. I mean, Waimea is very similar to Mavericks in the sense that it is a slab and it really jacks up quick. And whereas like Jaws or Nazaré or some of these other waves kind of like have a little more momentum and they kind of like grow and feather for a while. But that being said, if you're just right in the spot, you're good to go. And I got a little one, I got a bigger one, and it was the waves that people were like caught inside a little bit and couldn't turn fast to go on them. That I was like immediately turning around and going for it and making it like no problem. This board was made for pipe, by the way. It was not made for Waimea or any big waves, but got the wheels turning in my head. I'm like, gosh, this is insane. And the best part is I could hang out in a place you could never hang out because I could duck dive. A couple waves I was a little too far inside, and I was duck diving, 30-foot faced waves easily on my 7.6. Like, yeah, you could feel, the wave, the force drawing back, and I would get pulled back a little bit, but I could squeak through. And I was like, all right, I think there's like, on the right day, there's like an extreme example of like a piece of equipment you could ride. 99% of the time, it's probably better to be on a bigger board. I mean, these guys were rolling into these Waimea waves, and the hardest part about me catching a wave that day was not getting speared, because I was having to sit 20 yards farther in than they were. But it added a unique challenge, and I almost felt safer once I was like taking off and I was getting to my feet and dropping in, because I had this little board that had so much maneuverability that I could just cut across the face, and if it was barreling, be completely just under the lip. But instead of that, you'd have like boards and people, because most waves are party waves out there at Waimea. And there was about 50 people out too this day, because it was like first biggest day. And with the Eddie ceremony coming up, everyone wants to be seen surfing Waimea, because there's a chance to maybe next year get on an alternate list or get an invitee list, because the organizers that put on the Eddie, every swell, they're there watching. So
really,
pretty much there's no, I wouldn't say easier time, but better time to have an opportunity to get into the Eddie. You just go out there and you prove you're maybe one of the best. But, that kind of brings me to an interesting point, which is, the last winner, Luke Shepherdson, he won in 2020. Was it 22 now? I think it was 23, right? No, it was 22.
Was it? I think it was 23.
Yeah, okay. Let's say
it was 23.
It was 23.
January 2023.
It's just weird how winters work because our winter is like 23, 24, and then 22, 23. You know what I mean? So it was 23 February, and Luke Shepherdson won the Eddie Aikau. And kind of the most perfect story you've ever heard because he's an on-duty lifeguard, just as Eddie once was, and he was working the tower that day during the Eddie at Waimea Bay. I mean, after my first heat, I remember coming in and he was on the quad, making sure the hundreds, maybe even thousands of people on the beach weren't getting swept off. And he was on duty between his heats. And
That's
so
insane.
he was probably the right person to win that day. One, because he's an incredible big wave surfer. Two, because he really embodies the spirit of Eddie Aikau. And Eddie Aikau was someone at Waimea Bay that never lost a life, and he saved hundreds of lives. He was the first lifeguard at Waimea Bay. So it was kind of this weird, or this really cool full circle moment where I think, he really embodied the spirit of Eddie. And yeah, his life was forever changed because maybe the biggest thing in surfing right now is to win a world title. That's the most prestigious thing. It used to be maybe Triple Crown was the next best thing to winning, a world title. But that has long been gone. But the Eddie Aikau is definitely the most prestigious single event you could probably win in all of surfing, only because there's been only a handful of winners. I think there's like 7 or so. I don't know, Ridge, you maybe look up exactly how many winners there is over the last 35, 40 years or whatever it's been, because the event doesn't run all the time. It only runs sometimes every 10 years.
Yeah, that's crazy. And it's cool to see, too. I just saw the poster today. It seems like they have some real industry backing again with Rip Curl being the headlining sponsor. I think there was a few years they were really pretty ragtag running it, which was awesome that the Aikau family kept it going. It'd be such a shame if there's a giant swell at Waimea and they didn't run it.
Well, I remember there was a couple years they could have totally ran it, but they didn't have the funding or they didn't have the support after Quicksilver wasn't involved. So it was rad that Rip Curl popped in for this year because now it's like, I would say it always had its prestige, even with or without a sponsor, but now it has it looks the way it should. It has that stadium like feel because they have the money for the infrastructure and all that sort of stuff. So it definitely adds to it.
Yeah, and Waimea is I've never surfed it, but it seems like a pretty unique wave. And my question to you, just with the Eddie hype right now, is what makes a really good Waimea surfer? Is a good Waimea surfer different than a good Jaws surfer, or is just being good in big waves just transfers to Waimea easily? Or do you have to spend a ton of time out there? Or, what would you say would be a winning formula for that contest?
I would say Waimea is kind of the original gnarly big wave because at first it was Makaha and then it was Sunset, both on its days pretty heavy, but usually very clean when you're surfing those types of waves. Waimea was the first lurchy big step up. And it's no matter how big it gets out there, I would say, it could never compare to the power or size of a Jaws, Peahi, or a big Mavericks Day, or even a Nazaré. I would hold those into a different league, but it's still a gnarly big wave. I think most of the time when it's not gigantic, actually when it's gigantic, it's a lot easier because it moves off the ledge a little bit and you can get these crazy chip shots. You look for the ones that close out the bay because it is deep enough in the channel where while it is closing out, the whitewater is not going to absolutely just destroy you as if you were on the bowl. If you're in the wrong place, the wrong time on any big wave, anywhere, you could totally die and get pounded and be held down for a long time. With Waimea, it's one really big impact and it can hold you down, send you really deep. With flotation vests, with pole vests, it's a little bit different. You come up very quick. But I think a good big wave surfer out at Waimea can be a great big wave surfer at Jaws and stuff, but someone that does come from like Jaws Mavericks or Nazaré or something like that in the paddling realm, it's pretty nice going to a place like Waimea because you're in a tight bay. The wave is pretty much in the same spot every single time. It does go out a little bit further. I usually line up with some palm trees and the church. I have like a lineup there, and there's a few different tiers. When it gets bigger, you line up with something different. It's just rad to have the church there. So while it's still gnarly and you're still scared in some way, it's a little more approachable, and that makes it even more fun. So I actually really have a lot of fun out at Waimea Bay. I mean, the best big wave surfer out at Waimea Bay right now is probably Luke Shepardson. He takes a real different approach than everyone else. Most of the time during the Eddie Aikau, everyone's fighting and jockeying who could get the deepest because it's kind of a, getting a priority right away. Even though Waimea, you can go with multiple people. But if you're in the Eddie, whoever's deepest gets the most points if you make the ride. Of course, John Florence knows that place backwards. Nathan, and the North Shore crew do. But I'm going to just say Luke right now because he won the Eddie and it's proven that, he's the most recent winner. And then John got second this last one too. And he knows that place backwards as well. But the difference between everyone else and Luke is, well, he's in the tower all the time. So he's watching this wave, whether it's breaking big or not. So I think there's a connection there. But he sits really wide. A lot of people sit really deep on the bowl and get that steep part of the wave, but it's like one area and it's very tricky to be in the right spot. It's like you're either going or you're not. Luke will sit wider. He'll still get those types of waves, but there's these magical waves that come more out of the west and they stand up the tallest. And he could look like he's completely out of position in a pack of 40 people and be right on the button where everyone's out of position. And he just is like right where you need to be, super steep drop. And I watched it this last swell. It's actually, this is the coolest thing is like, I think he had a bit of this already, but after winning the Eddie and being on the swell, he was royalty out in the lineup. Everyone was wanting to talk to him. Everyone was giving him, the respect and space when he was paddling for wave. Like, oh, Luke's paddling for wave. No one paddle, which is really nice. Cool. Well, it really must be nice to feel that because it's similar to how John is out at Pipeline or Jamie O'Brien is out at Pipeline. When those guys paddle at Pipeline, the entire crowd doesn't even look at the wave. It could be the best wave ever. They'll just paddle right over it. Some guys might be in better positions, but those guys have earned, years and years to be at the top of the pecking order. And they got the respect of everyone. So, that's why they end up getting the best waves you see at Pipeline. Luke, it was pretty rad because there's 50 guys out and everyone saw Luke paddling. There might have been other guys that could have gone deeper or whatever, or even wider, and no one paddled. And I could see this all because I was on a 7.6 on the inside, just in my wetsuit, no vest or anything.
Oh yeah, I was going to ask. You didn't have any flotation?
I didn't have any flotation. I just had my long arm, short leg, 2 mil spring suit and a Sunset Beach leash, which isn't a big wave leash. But the board's so small, it's probably not going to break. And again, it kind of ended up being a lot bigger than I anticipated out there.
That's pretty big to be with nothing.
And I didn't really, I got hit by a couple whitewaters when you straighten out and got a little ragdolled, but I missed the big, horrible part. But that's what made it really fun because I was all loose out in the lineup. I didn't have any, I wasn't wearing any inflation. I wasn't wearing any padding.
Pretty core too.
Yeah, I was riding a thin leash. I had like a 7.6. My board was probably, I think most people were out there were on 9.8s to 10.2s. So it was like a couple feet shorter.
Were people tripping on you when you paddled out on that?
Yeah, they're like, what are you riding? And I'm like, 7.6. And they're like, your pipe board? And I was like, oh yeah, second reef pipe board. Jerry made it, whatever. And it was funny because when I sit on it, I'm like underwater. I'm like to my belly button, which is, you're sitting kind of high.
Yeah.
Compared to most 7.6s or pipe boards. But I was sitting, and most time these guys were on. So if let's say my board was probably in the range of like 45 liters to maybe 46 liters, right? I'd say that's probably what it was. Their boards were probably in the range of like 80 liters, so it was like half almost of their board, half. But it was a unique challenge, and now I want to really test it in other big waves. And it has to be the right day, of course. It has to be clean, I think. But I think I could ride a giant wave out of Pe'ahi on a tiny board like that. Like,
that'd be sick.
Guys like Albie Lair and, Tori Meister and a few others have been riding 8/8s out there. And that's considered quite short. I've ridden 8/8s out there for a long time as well, but going more than a foot shorter, I think is like two extremes. I want a board that's either going to chip me in early or a board I can just take off super late and I could duck dive,
Yeah.
On the right day,
Yeah.
I think you could do it. So there in Mavericks, I'm really excited. Mavericks, because it's like a bigger version kind of a Waimea. It's like, there's so many waves I've been paddling over where I could have gone, but my board's too long to fit. And I'm like,
Yeah.
this 7.6. So I'm making my own right now. I'm shaping my own with some new tech that we've been working on at KT Surfing, some new construction to get a lot of like response and flex out of the board, which is completely rare and impossible in most big wave boards. But then we're also weighting it to the perfect weight. And I'm probably going to go 2 pounds heavier than I went with my jerry board, because once again, that jerry board was made for pipe and it wasn't made for this, but it's opened a door to a whole new world.
Yeah, I kind of experimented a bit last season. I had one paddle day out at Jaws, and I did the first half of the session on a 9.4, and I was sitting pretty West Bowl, and it was kind of a smaller day where it was pretty lurchy, and most of my drops I was like almost purling, and I was pretty scared because I just got an 8.8, and I was pretty scared to go smaller just because it means you have to take off a lot more under it, and I was shocked on how much easier of a time I had on the 8.8 on the West Bowl. It was like the second I stood up, I could be pretty much under the lip, and then the nose just locked straight into the drop. And
it doesn't force you down,
liked that.
Right?
Yeah, I liked it so much more. I think obviously if you're sitting middle peak or north peak, you probably want some extra length. But for West Bowl, I like the 8.8.
I think on a clean day at the peak, it does stand up and then it like loads up again. I think you could ride a 7.6 out there on a clean day, no wind.
Yeah,
that's backing you up where you're hitting chop, because you need the momentum with a big board to kind of get through that. The mid peak would probably be the hardest because it's like in between. The West Bowl, the most ideal, because you're about to get caught inside. You could try to duck dive, but that wave has a lot of pull. But even if you have to bail, the board's so small, it's not dragging you. And you can get on it and like dip, early. If it's already pitching barreling, I'm bailing. But, like if it's like right before, you could totally make it through. So it'll be interesting.
I've ducked over Jaws wave once before. It was a small day, I forgot about, I actually have ridden a really tiny board out there. I think it was your 8.6.
Oh, it was the 8.6.
8.6 Channel Islands.
Yeah, that's right. It was like a board that Derek Dorner and Kelly Slater developed for Waimea. Gosh, was that 10 years ago now? Yeah,
it was kind of an old board, but it was the funniest situation because I'm about to get caught inside. But I was so not scared and not just noticing this giant wave coming at me because our friend Ryan Funk was dropping in on the sup.
Oh yeah.
And he literally, it was a bomb. Everybody missed it. And he just took a few strokes under the lip. And the second his board got planing, he was already in the barrel.
Yeah, barrel.
And I'm just paddling and I'm just mesmerized by Ryan just in this barrel. And next thing I know, the foam ball hits him and he's like fully stretched out, cartwheeling through the barrel. And I'm just so mesmerized that I didn't even I was instinctually starting to duck dive as if I'm like at Hokipa. And next thing I know, I'm just duck diving and I'm underwater. I'm like, what did I just do? I just tried duck diving and somehow I just squeaked through it and I got sucked back super far, but I made it. And luckily there was another one behind.
And that was on an 8.6.
It was so funny.
Imagine if you had the 7.6.
Oh, easy. You're easily duck diving.
But you're forgetting the most important thing about Ryan going on that barreling wave. He broke his femur.
No, it wasn't that one, but
what?
That was a different day.
So he did that twice. Because he did the same thing when he broke his femur.
The one that he broke his femur, I think he was trying to pull into a West Bowl and it kind of didn't barrel at the last second. He jumped off and then the board just smacked his femur.
The rail of his board, hit his leg and he snapped his femur. Was it compound? So was it coming out?
Oh, almost.
Ooh, like you could see maybe the lump on his skin and
Yeah.
Poor guy. We visited him in the hospital after that session, and that kind of like put a little bit of an end to his big wave surfing out there. Hopefully he comes back. I mean, that was years ago now, but that something like that is a femur like that. Oh, and I mean, we never. Let's go into some gore real quick. Ryan had a gnarly femur injury, but you remember? Have you seen Steve? Have you seen Steve?
Oh,
Steve's a awesome South African guy that cut his teeth out at Mavericks. Charger, lives here on Maui now. Foils, big wave surfs, absolute legend. It's Steve Andrews, right, Ridge?
I think so.
Yeah. And so this is just the craziest story because you have Ryan's story where, the rail of this carbon board. These boards are built so bolt bomber that if it hits you, it's going to hurt you. It's a lot of luck that's involved. But Steve's, Ryan's is gnarly, but Steve's might be just even that much gnarlier because what was it? He was getting caught inside by a 25-footer. Roll the footage, Rich. And he bailed his board and was diving through. And when I talked to Steve about this, he could see, it was like the afternoon, so he could see this like emerald, light, and it was like this green turquoise water, and he was like coming through the back. He's like, I'm gonna make it. And his leash, I can remember seeing this in person, but then you could see it on the video. His board gets shot in the air, and he's diving this way, and his leash, which these leashes are so thick, you could tow a car, pulled up at the right angle. It pulled his leg back into his hip until it stopped, and it jerked really quick, and it snapped his femur. And then he got sucked over the falls, 50-foot faced wave, mind you, held under. He was in so much pain because now the muscle and skin are the only thing holding his leg together. The femur snapped clean in half, like bad. And the board is yanking on him, and he goes to pull his vest, but he can't really pull it. By the time he pulls it, he's coming up, and the next one lands right on his head. He didn't even get to the surface. He was probably like 5 feet from the surface, according to his account. And then he had a 2-wave hold down, 10-foot board, pulling on his leg with a broken femur. And then finally he pops up. He must have been underwater for like 45 seconds to a minute, right? And then
it's crazy.
He got saved, almost blacked out. Well, he got on the ski, and now his leash is pulling his leg.
Oh,
and so I think he got pounded again, and the ski had to come around and get him. And then he had to get a boat ride into Maliko, get an ambulance, and oh my gosh, like
that was so. Apparently,
freaks me
were
out.
you underwater when it happened? Because other people told me that they can hear the sound of a bone snapping when everyone was underwater at the same time. That must have just been the gnarliest thing ever to hear.
I mean, getting caught inside, I've heard leashes break, like these giant, FCS Dakine leashes, these big wave leashes. I can't even remember the gauge. I swear they're like about that big,
Yeah,
like, an inch in circumference. And basically it sounds like gunshots. It's like pack, 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 because there's so much force that it takes that when it breaks, it's like this loud percussion. So
it's like a whip.
If you could hear his legs snapping underwater, like a femur, actually, you just reminded me. I remember someone telling me about what it sounded like.
Dang.
And this just came back to me. They described it as if a tree was falling over and you could hear the fibers of the wood going, but it was all pretty quick, but it was like this fibrous sound. So
that's terrible.
Yeah, you know what? He's good now. He's still charging.
He was actually
mental boards.
He was out this past Swell towing. I think that was his first time in a while actually riding waves, which was cool to see him back out there.
It's good to see when people can get back on the horse, because something like that, it could just be so traumatic that why would you ever want to do something like that again? But this kind of brings me back to another thought. What about the fact that there's bodyboarders that are paddling into, I've seen bodyboarders charging out at Pe'ahi, maybe not getting on the biggest waves, but fully kicking themselves in on like I don't know, how long is a bodyboard? 3 feet long?
42 42 inches.
42 inches. And that makes you kind of think, you're like, well, if they're catching waves, how short could we go surfing? Like, you could paddle faster than a bodyboarder on a 7.6 for sure, even if they have fins, if you have like momentum, right? So it just makes you think. It just makes you think.
No, you could go small for sure. What about Kalani Latanzi kicked in and body surfed and got barreled and made it out? If you can do that, you can ride a 7.6 at Jaws for sure.
Yeah, he literally got barreled. I think it's like the only proper made barrel I think I've maybe ever seen body surfing that was like obviously on that scale. Is the biggest wave ever body surfed successfully. Most big wave body surfing rides are unsuccessful. But that when it comes back to it, it has to be the right day, right? Like, I don't think you could go do it on a long interval swell because you need to be chipping in early before that kink in the wave comes in. And you need to do it when it's a lower interval. So the wave, like, it's not as pitchy quick. It like feathers longer. It stands
up for a little bit longer.
Yeah. And I think you don't do it on a 25-foot day. You maybe go on a 20-foot day, which is a 40-foot faced wave. I mean, on that day that Aaron Gold broke the world record with the biggest wave ever paddled in, still, I was riding an 8.8 that day. Jerry Lopez
really?
shape as well. I think it's something with Jerry's rockers, maybe. I don't know what it is, but his boards have always been magic under my feet. And I was on an 8.8 epoxy. The thing weighed maybe 7 pounds.
Jeez, were you sitting West Bowl?
I was like mid-peak at that era, 2016. I was like, if Albie was at West Bowl, I would be, and then like you had Shane Dorian, Ian Walsh out at North Peak. I was always West Bowl or a mid-peak, which was like in between the two. So you'd get really tall ones, but you'd also get those really wedgy ones. And I think that's why my board worked, because I could chip into these wedgy waves. And so, yeah, just a little bit different. I also have this thought that if you could chip into a North Peak wave on a tiny board, you could pump and you could make waves that you could normally not make on a 10-foot board, because A, it's very slow, and B, it just, it's hard to like get high on the face and drop back in. Yeah,
you kind of just have to pick your line and hope.
Well, so, okay, we completely missed out on this swell. What you got to go to Jaws, so lucky you.
Yeah.
What was it like being back out there after freaking 10 months?
Oh, gosh, yeah, it's been forever. I think it was a year since we had a proper day out there. We had a random day in March, but I don't really count that because it was only like 12 feet. But yeah, it was a trip because I was calling you all day trying to see what you were going to do, if you were going to come back, just trying to plan. I had Ola Kernan, our main water safety guy, recruited Otis, the young rookie that we're bringing under our wing to start going out there. And then Dad came as well. But we were at your warehouse with the skis out and ready. And I was looking at it was about maybe 1 o'clock at this point. I was looking at the buoys, and Pauella buoy was 6 feet at 17 seconds. And I'm like, what are we doing right now? We're literally going to go up there and it's going to be flat. That's half the size of what it needs to be. And I was pretty apprehensive. And not to mention too, I had a cold, which I still kind of have. And I knew, I was like, okay, I have one solid session this swell, and I don't want to go past it. I knew that adrenaline would kick in and I'd be okay to push through one session. But the point is I had to decide between going that afternoon or the next morning. I knew I could only pick one. So it was a pretty big decision because I really wanted to surf Jaws. I didn't want to miss it. It would have sucked to gone up that afternoon, blew out all my energy going through the whole process, and then it ends up not being good. So luckily Dad, in Dad fashion, just said, do you know what, just commit. Let's just go. And it was a really good decision because by the time we got up there at about 3:30, the swell just ramped up so fast. I was tripping. It was Jesse Richmond and Patry were out kiting, and those were the only guys out. And there was a few other people that pulled up at the same time as us, and we're watching, and all of a sudden some like 12, 15 footers started coming in. And then I was just like, it's our classic thing. The second you see that place turning on, freaking grab the rope and get out there. Everyone else was kind of watching, but like we always say, we'd rather check the surf from just being on the wave, it doesn't, we don't like just sitting there and watching, but yeah, I was able to get out there with pretty much an empty lineup other than the kiters, but the wind was pretty light, so they weren't getting much. And I was able to sort of get my pick of the litter there for like an hour before other people came out, but it was pretty nice. I was definitely missing you out there. It was weird. It was weird not having you tow me in, but Ola did a great job and got me on some fun waves. And I had one close call, one fun wave, but
that wave was
luckily
crazy.
didn't fall.
Like when I saw the video, I thought for sure you were falling. And I was like, oh no, Ridge won't like falling his first wave back out there. You'll think it's voodoo. But you like had so much momentum. You made it around, and a testament to how good of a surfer you are, but also how good your board was, because that thing, that board behind you actually, seems like
right there
to have carried you through the heaviest rides of your life, and it's still here. It's unreal.
The fact that it's still here and hasn't gotten destroyed on the rocks is a testament to that's a really good board, and I really trust it. But on that particular wave, so how I was sort of approaching that session, it was a little bit different than usual days, because there was a couple paddlers out. There was Albie Lair and Kai Paula. And when there's paddlers, there's only two of them. So there was a ton of waves that were towable that they weren't in the position to get. But I always like to go up to those guys and just let them, they know this already, but just let them know. It's like, okay, if you're in the position, just go. It's super easy for me to see you paddling. Like we paddle, we can see where, if they're in the spot or not, and it's easy to kick out. So in this particular wave, it was one of the bigger waves that came in, and Albie kind of was in the spot, and I was just kind of stalling up at the top, sort of paying attention to him, making sure he wasn't going to go. Cause I didn't want to be on the same wave as him, because it's just dangerous.
Yeah.
So I waited a little bit, and waiting a little bit made it so I wasn't sort of focused on what the wave was doing. By the time I realized he wasn't going to go, I put my front foot down, committed to the wave, and I kind of realized I was deep, which is good because that's how you get barreled. But this wave had a weird look to it. It was flaring, which means it's not going to barrel. It's just the whole thing's going to shut down. And at that point, I'm like, oh no, I got to like really harness my speed. So I just got as low as I could, tried to sort of, it's counterintuitive, but you kind of have to wait at the top a little bit longer to get more speed. You don't want to go down too early and then you're just dead in the water, essentially. So I waited long, and I got down to the bottom, and I looked up, and I just see 40-foot wall and the thing's feathering. And that feeling where you're just like, oh gosh, like this is not going to end well. I'm just at the bottom of this thing. And I just looked forward, got in my layered just survival stance, and just, how it is. The explosion is just so loud. It just almost vibrates your brain a little bit when it explodes behind you. The water shoots in front of me. And at that point, you're just waiting to get your legs taken out. And then all of a sudden you're going to be spinning underwater. And somehow I got super lucky. The initial explosion cleared, and I'm still going somehow. And I was able to just hop around it and kind of was able to enjoy the rest of the wave. But I came out and I was sort of tripping. I really thought I was not going to make it. And that would have been kind of a sucky way to start the year, but
I think
worked out.
By the afternoon, I think someone lost a machine on the rocks too, right? A jet ski?
I think that was the next morning.
The next morning, someone lost a jet ski on the rocks. Gosh, I swear sometimes those not giant days, those medium, small days, the wave, there's like a lot, the energy doesn't dissipate as quick because it's not unloading at first at the reef right away. It like loads up on the inside a lot, right? Like it loads up right on the shore rake. And that's when we've lost our fair share of skis, was because it's so lurchy in there. And before the Sea-Doos, we didn't have as much horsepower, and it makes a difference. So when I was sympathize with those guys, whoever lost it, I didn't hear what happened, if they helicoptered it off or what ended up happening. But gosh, like, no matter what, for the rest of the time that anyone's riding that wave, it's gonna take what it wants, whether, no matter how good you are, or even especially how inexperienced you are, it could definitely bite you in the tuchus. But it kind of like, you're talking about paddling. Well, Jaws is an interesting beast because it can support a lot of different things at once. You can have tow-in surfers, you can have kiters, you can have windsurfers, you can have paddlers. And, where Albie and Kite Paula sit are the West Bowl, the west ones. And for the most part, when those sets come in, it goes straight to the bowl, especially at that size. So it's really easy towing and kiting to see that and completely avoid it. And then pick off the North Peak ones, which was the one you were looking at, which is a lot deeper where they're not quite in position. So as long as everyone's on the same page and there's a healthy respect level, and you sort of always allow the one craft that has the hardest time to catch the wave the most priority, which is surfing, then it all works out. And everyone knows everyone, right? Everyone's grown up with each other. So it's a little different. But that kind of brings me to the recent happenings out at Nazaré lately. I mean, every time I open up, social media, you just see like a collision, or you see like a near spearing or a lost jet ski. And, we haven't been there yet. We're waiting for the Nazaré Tow-In Challenge to happen so we can go back and compete. But based on what I'm seeing from afar, like when I check the cam at Nazaré, there's like 40 jet skis out whizzing around. There's no order. Usually at big waves, you try to work in an oval. Okay, get towed into the wave. Ski goes around all the boats, picks up the guy. And then you're kind of like, as a surfer, you end up riding in this big oval shape. At Nazaré, it's like, a bunch of bees or mosquitoes. And there was 2 videos. There was one where I think it was Nick Von Rupp was dropping in, and his jet ski pilot cut across, and a paddle surfer saw an opportunity to chip in way out. He dropped in, got his fin stuck on the back of the tow rope, and then he fell and like landed into Nick, and they just got obliterated, sucked over the falls. They were okay in the end. It was confirmed, but that was just kind of gnarly. And then the other one, you saw the other one where the guy
I just saw that.
First of all, there is a certain level when it comes to big wave surfing, and the guy that was paddling into this particular wave, paddlers have the right of way, but this guy was never going to make it. He was paddling in, and he basically stood up, saw the tow surfer, and jumped, and like in the process sent his board like an arrow, and it missed the guy by like 6 inches. And the guy towing, probably should have seen it earlier too, but it was like, my gosh, like what is going on over there? Like,
and it's only like 6 feet. That's the crazy thing.
Yeah, it wasn't even that big. That's right. They haven't had a giant swell at Nazaré yet. Nothing like that you'd be like, ooh, spooky. It all has been like, you watch Lucas and you watch Pedro Scooby and, a bunch of the really good guys out there, and they're doing tricks, getting barreled, and it's like sick 12 footers, epic. Yeah. But there hasn't been like those spooky 25, 30 foot waves there yet. I mean, it's inevitable at Nazaré, but pretty trippy. I haven't seen it be like that small for that long, up till now or in December.
Yeah, it's like it's interesting. The tow versus paddling thing and them happening at the same time is always going to be controversial. But like we've said in the past, it's more about your etiquette and your overall respect. Obviously, there's a line where if there's more than say at Jaws 5 paddlers, it's probably good enough just to want to go and paddle, and we're going to want to go and paddle. But the days was only a few guys out, and there's a lot of waves going unridden. Towing, in our opinion, I think is the right move, as long as, we're respecting the priority of these guys. But it's really easy to do, especially at Jaws, because it's really orderly. But Nazaré is a whole different thing. It's a trip.
I mean, that's the thing is like, I was in the lineup, and you end up at Waimea, and you end up talking to a bunch of people. Jamie Mitchell's lived on the North Shore for many, many years now. I was talking to him about when he first started paddling Nazaré in 2015. And back then, there was still very few people that were considering Nazaré a good big wave spot, but even considering going there. I was looking back at some photos from like the first Nazaré paddle-in event that he won. And then also in just some of the sessions like Tom Lowe, Jamie Mitchell himself, Twiggy, Grant Twiggy Baker, and a handful of others as well. But they were paddling when it was massive, like 25-foot Hawaiian, 30-foot Hawaiian Nazaré, which no one paddles at that size now. Well, you can't really, because there's 40 jet skis.
Yeah.
And the problem is you have, with each jet ski team, you have a safety guy that's sitting on the inside, and he's just waking out the whole thing. Like, people wonder why I do chop hops out there is because there's jet ski wakes everywhere. So it's like
Perfect ramps.
For towing, I love it because I'm like sick. This guy just like burned through my wave and now I have like a kicker to hit. So it's like, but when you're paddling, you hit one of those and you're on those guys at the time were riding like 11.6s, you come to a dead stop.
Oh.
But, he seemed really grateful to have been able to get those insane waves. The other guys that were charging back in the day there too were the Scudin brothers, Will Scudin and Cliff Scudin. There's some pictures of them on like 30 footers, maybe bigger. Like Cliff, he didn't make it down the wave fully, but it was maybe arguably one of the biggest waves ever attempted paddling, I think.
Wow.
Maybe next to Jamie Mitchell's one at Belhara back in the day.
Yeah.
But Cliff's wave, that thing was like a teepee. And I think had he made it farther down the wave and kind of ridden it out, it would have been considered a world record. But yeah, so all that being said, people need to just chill a little bit. Just like pump the brakes. And, I think with tow and surfing, the philosophy should be like before you really earn your stripes to tow in, those types of situations, you should probably be a really accomplished big wave paddling surfer first. Like you could do both. I mean, I did both, but I'm willing to go paddle, as big as it gets when the conditions are right. But I like towing because there's a performance aspect to it. And there's, the amount of waves ridden. And we've seen, there've been giant days where the best, biggest waves go unridden because you can't paddle them. And at that point, it's like, guys, keep trying to paddle, but we're going to chip the ones that you guys aren't even near, right? That's just, I think, pretty common sense. But you have to have that awareness, and only a paddler almost knows the feeling where it's like, if I'm towing in, I see a guy has a shot of getting the biggest paddle wave of his life, I will straight up kick out. And it might compromise me pretty much because the next wave could come, but I'm on a tow board and I could dive through it, and that's the game you got to play. But a lot of guys won't do that. And they'll drive the jet ski straight through where all the paddlers are, and it's just
Gosh, it's so cringy to see that happen. It's crazy, the lack of awareness sometimes, and it's like for us, like you said, there's times when we tow and when there's a few paddlers out really respectfully, and then you see some people come out because they see us do it, and then all of a sudden they just go straight through the lineup, and it's just like, no, like it's really not doing anybody any favors. And it's like in Hawaii, it's anybody will tell you this. It's just respect. So you have to have a lot of respect for the other people in the lineup, and once that goes out the window, you get situations like you saw in Nazaré where it just becomes a madhouse and super dangerous.
Everyone's not trying to be that guy. Totally. But, ignorance is bliss. Sometimes what you don't know can totally affect other people. And when it's, can be life and death a lot of times in these situations, it could either be the sweetest day of your life where everything is not a drop of water out of place, but people can have an impact where it could be your utter nightmare. And that's the frustrating part. But, they're all in Nazaré trying to break the Guinness Book of World Records because that's where you're probably going to be able to do it most likely. I mean, there might be that odd megalodon swell that comes to Jaws where it gets to an unholy size. Same with Cortez Bank or even Mavericks and stuff. But those are like every 10 years, where it gets to a vertical level like that, where it hasn't had bad winds or whatever, mind you, whatever. And with, Nazaré, it's so consistent. A lot of these guys, their career is in the balance with making like that Guinness Book of World Record or getting close to it. Yeah. And so there's a lot of like tension and ambition surrounding that. And everyone wants to get their board in the lighthouse, and there's just, it's the only place on earth where big wave surfing feels like it matters in terms of not like a mainstream audience. Because when a mainstream audience watches big wave surfing, they don't know who's riding the wave, nor do they really care. They just see a tiny person on a giant wave. Yeah, but there, these people have made a name and career for themselves, and you get onto shore, and people are asking for autographs. You become a rock star, and some people are really humble about it. Other people, it goes straight to their head, and it's awesome.
100%, yeah.
You see it, and I'm like, dude, okay, just you need to cool your jets a little bit here, buddy.
Yeah, and it's just with the HBO show 100-Foot Wave, it's sort of the same thing. You know, there's people that go there just with the sole purpose of like Guinness World Record 100-Foot Wave. This is the place to be, and it was, and it's really honestly really good for us because Jaws is kind of being like pushed to the side a little bit. It was you would have been shocked for an opening day this swell. It was so uncrowded. Just the people we know that are pretty diehard and are out there every swell.
Way.
Yeah, nobody even from Oahu. It was just like North Shore Maui guys, which was pretty sick.
I've talked to like Koa Rossman and a bunch of the North Shore guys, and there was that era where it was like Jaws was the new thing, just like Nazaré is sort of that new thing still. And you know, it was like if you weren't there, it's like being a surfer, a barrel rider, not being at Pipeline in the winter. Like you just have to be there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's a lot of big waves on the North Shore of Oahu that were totally untapped for the longest time, mainly because no one thought they were possible in a way. The accessibility to them was like limited. And so Jaws proved that was survivable and that was rideable. And so now they're looking at waves like Himalayas, which is outside Laniakea, and Koa Rossman, who's a goofy footer, is like, yeah, I'd rather just go left in glassy waves and get a
huge barrel,
50-foot barrel going left, you know? And Jaws is the hardest wave in the world to surf backside. Kind of why you haven't seen somebody get a massive backside barrel out there, because it's so challenging on a 10-foot, 4-inch long board. So I think like a lot of people's attentions have turned, you know, North Shore will always be the mecca in so many different ways. Waimea will always have a place in big wave riding. But I think that's just the thing. Jaws has been there, done that, you know, and still as gnarly as it's ever been. The rides could still be gnarlier, but until it's the day of the year, you know, it's probably not going to have the same amount. A lot of it has to do with, you know, the surf forecasters as well.
And that's what made it super uncrowded this time.
And I just wish, you know, they'd forecast it, obviously, so you could look at it and discover it. But they wouldn't be like promoting it. This is Code Red, the hype.
This is going to be Jaws, yeah.
It brings in it's not so much the best guys, but it brings in this other crowd of people that are just there for the moment. They're not like dedicated to always riding these spots or pushing their big wave surfing as like a passion. It's kind of like, okay, this is like a media blitz we're going on.
This is an opportunity.
It's an opportunity, and that's fine too. But then it's just like, becomes a total nightmare because they don't know the structure of each lineup. And I try to always keep in my mind when I'm traveling to surf big waves, I try to conform to the structure of each lineup, whatever because a lot of it's different. You know, Mavericks has a different pecking order. Nazaré is a different beast entirely. Jaws, Pipeline, you know, anywhere, Chopu. So you got to read the room and understand like where you kind of can fit in and, you know, be respectful while still riding waves and having fun and you know, surviving. But a lot of people don't do that. And so they kind of can be, you know, a bull in a china shop and kind of like
crazy, yeah.
But it just tears up the whole rhythm of things, you know, the whole point. And so, you know, I just wish those guys would, like the forecasters, like just forecast it. If someone's really into it, they're gonna be looking and they're gonna go, and that's great. But not making this huge deal about it's going to be the day of the year, you know, because then it just like blows it out for us at our, you know, home spot. And you're just like, oh, guys, like we've been waiting that long too. So we just want to be able to go out there and breathe and not be suffocated by like people being in the way and, you know, unnecessary carnage.
100%. And it was a really nice breath of fresh air with this one. I hope there's more like that. Because it was very orderly. Everyone knew each other's priority, which is so nice because you're not having to jockey for waves.
Well, at the end of the day, if we all just take turns, everyone's going to get a great ride and it's awesome. You know,
if not more rides.
Way more rides. But when one person or a few people are being selfish, it throws the whole rhythm and priority and who's been waiting longer. If it's orderly, everyone can get their share and it's good. And that's, you know, no one needs to hog the source.
Yeah, gosh, how many times that happened where we're waiting and we know exactly which wave to go on, and this is maybe the type of wave other people wouldn't want because it's a little bit fast and scary, and we get cut off, and then you see the jet ski go up the back, and then you see the surfer go up the back because they got too scared because it's too nuts of a wave, and we're like, why? We were waiting so long, and then that happens.
Well, I told
and then
you
the
this
wave's empty and
winter,
perfect.
if it's our turn, whether someone's going in front of me or behind me or not, I'm going.
Yeah.
Just get me on the wave because I'm going to go 10 miles an hour quicker than they are. And, I'm going to ride like they're not there. So if they get body checked while I'm doing a backflip off the lip, that's on them, Like, it's just like, dude, at the end of the day, I'm sick of it. I've earned my spot. I've done it the hardest way you can. And, whatever. So it's just funny because, like, at the end of the day, like, hey, if it's your wave and you've been waiting and, you're not even one of the top dogs, like, whatever, go for it. But as soon as you start tapping into like a wave I'm trying to tow you into, a wave I'm trying to get for no good reason, it's like there's going to be problems, and, I don't mind spending time underwater, unlike most people out there who certainly mind spending time underwater. But hopefully it doesn't escalate to that.
Yeah, I hope it's sort of, I hope this first swell was sort of a teaser of what's to come, because it was pretty darn orderly, which was nice for sure. And it was that we were talking about the Eddie day before, and we've talked about my experience on the Eddie swell before, but it was almost like this swell was a mini version of that. It was the same exact direction in the same period, obviously not the swell height. And it was remember we were talking about how on the Eddie swell, it was almost, the barrels were almost, it would bait you into trying to get barreled. And then all of a sudden it would like regurgitate under itself. It would clamp and then it was doing exactly that. And I told you on the podcast we were talking about is I wouldn't make that mistake again of pulling into needless waves like that. And I didn't get barreled this time, but I
Did
definitely
anyone get barreled this time?
No, it was a little tricky.
You know how it is though. There are days out there where it's like turnkey. You don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
You're like, I'm just gonna get barreled and make it. And then there's other days, and then you start questioning your ability. Wow, am I scared to get barreled? But you're like, the wave's just not doing it. So you gotta like read the wave and do what's best. Like, okay, am I gonna just, if it's not barreling, I'm gonna work on turns and work on airs. And if it's barreling, I'm going to focus on getting barreled.
Yeah, for sure. And I was proud of myself for not getting clipped because it could easily happen. But it's interesting because I always thought at Jaws, the more west, those were the barreling days. But now I'm sort of thinking it has to be somewhere in between where it doesn't overly double up somehow.
Well, I think if it's west, it's okay, but you can't have too long of an interval in comparison to the swell height. So if this swell height was 11 feet or 12 feet and this interval was like 17, 18, it's just like it's the math it's not mathing out, like there's not enough swell height to like send over to kill that interval, because the interval at Pe'ahi gives a kink in the wave. It's what's always been known as the phantom chop, because it's invisible when you're riding it, but it makes it impossible to paddle in because you end up going off a ramp, so the perfect interval for, I think, getting like nice, consistent barrels paddling in is like that 15 to 16. 1 second can make such a difference, but 17 or up, it gets harder to get those barrels unless it's megalodon. Like, unless it's 20 feet at 20 seconds, basically I think the swell height and the swell period need to be very similar for that wave to work. I don't know.
Sense.
Working theory.
Yeah. And this part, so this swell was 12 at 18. But that being said, it was the only way it was going to break is if it was that longer period. If it was 12 at 12, it's like, it's not even surfable.
Well, yeah, but I mean, for that was like the best case scenario for it to just simply break.
For that swell.
Right.
It was, it was still producing a couple 20-foot sets. So that's amazing. It's amazing you get 12 foot of open ocean height and it almost quadruples it.
That's like that interval. It feels the bottom and it just loads all that energy and it, balls it up right onto that reef. Just,
I know. Since it was so long that we'd surfed Jaws and seen it proper, I kind of forgot how freaking perfect of a wave it is. Like no, I'm not. I don't want to say anything bad about any other big wave spot, but one of the last big days we had was Mavericks, and that was a jumbled up swell. It wasn't perfect at all,
shredded.
But it was so nice just being able to read the wave and know kind of what it's going to do. Yeah,
have a nice face to do stuff on that type of wave, like that much power and that much energy. To have a giant canvas to just perform, it's pretty rad.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the best big wave in the world that I've ever surfed. The best big wave in the world that I know. Maybe it's not the hottest ticket in town at the moment, but that's totally okay too.
It's kind of a good thing.
So yeah, after that swell, finally got to compete at Haleiwa, and you know, the Haleiwa event with the Sunset event that was just a couple weeks before, those used to be part of the Triple Crown. And now coming up is the Vans Pipe Masters, which is just an invitational only. So there's really no way of qualifying for that event unless you know someone, or, you know, maybe you get one crazy wave out at Pipe and they consider it worthy. But, you know, they invite who they want and that's just their event, right? But that used to be the final of the Surfing World Tour, where Andy Irons and Kelly Slater battled for titles, the most legendary rivalry ever, and champions were made. The last world title and the last Pipe Master, I think, was in that event, being at the end of the year where it's cumulative points, where it's not ending in a finals, was Italo Ferreira. And that was 2019, right before COVID. Post-COVID, everything's just gone wacky. So the Haleiwa event and Sunset are no longer Triple Crown. They become regional events. So for kids in Hawaii, you have to do good enough in the regional tour, which consists of those two spots, Ala Moana in the summertime. And then at times there could be like spots in Tahiti. But they haven't had those in a couple of years now. Pretty much like after COVID, those went away. So our Hawaii region is Hawaii and Tahiti. The problem with these events is that, of course, WCT surfers, Challenger surfers, because if you win the regional, you go to the Challengers, and that's a smaller tour that runs to qualify for the World Tour. There's like tiers and levels. But you get, you know, Hawaii has some of the best waves on earth. They're not broadcast, by the way. You know, there's no live feed. You can watch live scoring, and even then, they're not always live.
There's not even a time ticker.
Yeah, you don't even know how much time is on the heat.
Yeah.
And the problem is you have these kids that are trying to do these events, and they can't even gain an experience because first heat, they're going up against a CT surfer who's a veteran, who's obviously one of the world's best, and they're just dusting these kids and going on. And I understand why you'd want to do it. You know, I'd probably be in a similar position because it's like, wow, nobody out at Sunset, nobody out at Haleiwa. This is great training for the tour right before the tour starts in January. That being said, it's not the CT people's problem. It's the WSL, I think, needing to consider no one from Hawaii is going to get any good at competing if they're not able to actually put reps in and do heats and like build up the confidence, but build up the competitiveness that is required to understand the art of competing. Let's say, like you need to spend times doing heats, and you can do mock heats, but it's nothing like a real event. And all these events that happen in Hawaii, because there are such good spots, the best in the world have to do it. But no other qualifying series would ever do that. Could you imagine the NFL allowing NFL players to go to like high school games or even college games, you know?
Yeah,
and like
it would be ridiculous.
I'm only saying that, and I'm not trying to qualify or anything. I love doing the events, and I'm happy to go against CT surfers because it's a worthy challenge. And, you know, I want to be able to be the best eventually. But I'm just thinking from, you know, a perspective, I'm like, it'd be really great if these events happened for these up and coming Hawaii surfers that gave them the time to like get better. Because you do 1, 2 heats, 3 heats, and it's all luck. Like you might get the normal heats with the other regional guys, but there's a really good chance your first heat's going to be against some gnarly CT guy and you're going to get blown out. And how are you supposed to improve if you can't actually make heats? Like in a way, it sounds ridiculous because people will be like, well, you got to beat the best to be the best. But how are you supposed to beat the best if you don't know how to? Like,
yeah.
And that's the whole point of a regional tour. And because it's Hawaii region and Tahiti, you can't actually go to North America. You can't go to California. You can't go to the East Coast, collect points to qualify because it's not outside of your region. And Hawaii is not in the Olympics because it's part of the United States. But within, the surfing world, it's considered its own country, kind of, Hawaii region. So, yeah, I mean, I think if they could, listen, bring back the Triple Crown. That's great. And then also have a regional event at these spots for everyone else, all the up-and-comers. Because, their careers can't even get started because, if they're someone sees they didn't make a heat because they went up against CT, they don't see the CT guy. They just see well, this kid's not making heats. We're not investing in him. No sponsorships. And, there's really no support in the industry that much anymore. But all of that matters, Mm-hmm. One big result, wow, this up and coming kid got third. He would have never gotten third if, he went against a CT guy first heat,
Yeah. And not to mention too, another thing about the regional tour is it's the Hawaii region, but the last few years it's just been Oahu. There's a lot of other surfers in Hawaii that aren't like the Oahu guys. They're surfing Sunset, Haleiwa, Bowls every time it breaks. It's not so easy for a lot of, outer island guys to go and get that sort of experience. And you go to these waves and they're so good at them. And they're really specific, tricky waves that you need to surf a lot.
Specific boards for them too.
And yeah, you need specific boards. It would be sick if there was at least one or two events in some other islands. And the lack of the webcast thing, it gets me so I don't really do those events, but I love watching them. And I'm sure a lot of people share the same sentiment. It's some of the best waves in the world that have always been broadcasted. And there's the excuse. It's okay, there's not a lot of budget for the Hawaii region, but the PWA windsurfing event had a really good live stream. There's events in Taiwan and Cloud9 and in where's that? In the Philippines have it. I would love to see a real a reason why they can't do it.
Well, if you look at the Challenger Series this year, which is the next best tour to being on the World Tour, they're typically running good places. Most of the time, it's awful waves. This regional event, we had Ala Bowls going off this summer. We had Sunset Beach that was 10 to 12 feet pumping.
Firing.
And then you also have Haleiwa. I think those places I think everyone would watch it. They might be some of the higher viewed things. And
guaranteed.
Yeah, I always thought they should have one on Maui, do one. They used to have one at Honolulu back in the day. I know that's touchy because, they used to have one at Honolulu Bay. Insane. It was for the qualifying series way back in the day. But I mean, Hokipa breaks good every single day at any size. Great for airs, good for open carve turns. Do a Maui event there. Obviously you have Kauai and Big Island, but I think it would be great to have more events because these kids that come out of the HSA, which is the Hawaii Surfing Association, or the NSSA, which is what you would use to qualify to go to a nationals in, over in San Clemente at Trestles, or actually now at Huntington Beach. They have, events all the time. And so you got to be able to have these kids do reps because you have Ala Bowls in May or whatever. And then you have to wait all the way till the end of October for Sunset. And then you do at the end of November, Haleiwa. And then that's it. Mm-hmm. There's no other events and kids can't afford to necessarily travel. They can get away with going inter-island, but think about the toll on the kids from the outer islands. They got to pay for a place to stay, a car, all in one island. And it adds up, totally. So and just a live feed would be great to start.
Yeah. And do you know what? I've been talking to a few guys about this issue of not having enough opportunities, and something that places like Australia do really well. And same with California is they have the board riding clubs. And I know that's sort of a new thing that people are talking about. I think there's some on Oahu, but there's guys talking about doing it on Maui, you know, where there'd be like a North Shore Surf Club, West Side, and you'd have events almost every weekend. That would, I guaranteed there'd be a very linear correlation between starting that and also having kids that make it to the higher levels of competition in like 10 years.
Mean, we can't totally blame WSL. I think they're spread pretty thin with trying to do so much all the time, just trying to run one world tour, let alone 3, right? But that being said, you're absolutely right. We almost as surfers have to just take it into our own hands. And you know, it doesn't have to have a giant scaffolding. Like at the end of the day, I'd be happy with like, you know, a table, a horn, maybe a loudspeaker and judges, you know, and, you know, score me. I don't even if I can't hear the scores, just score me. I got how much? 25 minutes, 15, whatever. Just judge me so that I can learn how to compete for judges, which is different than just normal surfing. You know, doing these board riders, how fun. That's great community too, because this is the birthplace of surfing. And we should actually have the best regional series on the face of the planet. It should be even more sought after than possibly the world tour. Because most of the best waves on earth, you know, there's a lot of them in a concentrated area like Hawaii. We could totally have a mini tour. And that's what everyone misses about even just the Triple Crown. Because that was the next biggest thing to winning a world title if you won the Triple Crown. Pipeline, Sunset, Haleiwa, you know? Yeah. But now if you had it around Hawaii, oh, it'd be awesome. Like, can you imagine? Just like...
Yeah, it'd be so fun.
And throughout the whole year. So, you know, people can just be hot this whole time, you know? And like, there's the reason why there's not that many Hawaii surfers on tour. And it's just, I think a lot of it is, you know, being behind versus like the competitive prowess of these other nations.
Yeah, Australia, Brazil, they see some talent in a young kid and they're fostering it. And there's a reason why that's all the best surfers are coming out of those places. So yeah, we're the birthplace of surfing. There's no way that we shouldn't be on that level too.
Truth. Yeah. Well, so to wrap up how I did in that event, made it to the round of 32, have a hard time, you know, breaking into quarters or non. I ended up having a sick heat. It was kind of with Ian Gentile, Finn McGill, and myself. I had some fun heats before, and I was like pretty stoked because my boards have been allowing me to surf the ones I've been shaping. I shaped to 6'6", 6'4", 6'1", 5'11", for Sunset and for Haleiwa. Sunset was mainly 6'6", 6'4". Haleiwa was 6'1", 5'11", really. You don't need too much bigger unless it's biblical. But essentially, the boards were helping me get bigger scores. And I was in the 7-point range, and then I was in, you know, getting into the 8s and closer to the 9s. And my total heat scores were around 13 to 14 heats score total, which is... You can win heats, and you can, like, they say to win a world title, this is different judging, of course, but to win a world title, if you have over 14-point heat score total, or your average is 14 points, that's a world title. To do that average is hard, obviously.
Yeah.
But in this heat, I was like, Finn and Ian were just going off, and they were getting massive scores, 9s, 8s, 7s. And then on my side, I was, you know, needing a score at the last minute. And there was this really awesome moment. And this is why I wasn't too bummed when I lost to those guys, because I needed a score. I needed basically an 8.4, and the wave came to me in the last 5 seconds. There were 5, 4,
That's so
3.
sick.
And I stood up. I didn't even hear the horn go off or anything. And I had like a good first wrap, and then I went up, hit a vertical turn, and there was a closeout, and I just went for it, and I hit it, and I made it. I ended up getting an 8.25, so I just lost out. It's really hard to get scored, you know, if you're going up against established talent, CT level, or you're going up against, you know, just hometown favorites. You know, it's like you have to be black and white. If you're going to beat them, you have to absolutely destroy them, which I've been able to get close to beating them, but not black and white enough for the judges to give it to me. It's always going to go that way. And that's just part of the game, you know? I just got to get better, right? I think I actually got the score with that wave, but at the end of the day, the best thing that came out of that was now I'm changing the way my board is a little bit. I'm going to make it even more explosive, hopefully. Changing the fin positions, changing the types of fins, changing my approach at my surfing. So it was really beneficial. Yeah, I would like to have made the quarters and hopefully all the way to the finals, but there's always, you know, a bright side out of it. My career doesn't hinge on this, and it's kind of scary and sad because a lot of these kids that do lose, it's like they're done until May, and they have nothing to show for. They lost first heat and it's over, and they're the ones that are, you know, crying in the parking lot afterwards because their dream just got shattered for a whole nother year. They can't do the Challenger to get on the CT because they didn't do good enough for whatever reason. And, you know, it's not the CT, it's the regional event. So there is the same amount of support, obviously. So that's why we brought it up before. You know, my situation's vastly different than many others.
Yeah, competitive surfing has got to be one of the most brutal professions, at least coming out of Hawaii. It can be so heartbreaking, and surfing's so subjective in that, you know, you have people that are judging your surfing, which, you know, it could come down to they just like someone else's style better. It's so
or they could just like them more. They work out in the gym with them. They see them every day. They watch them free surf at these spots, and they have an idea of like what success looks like. And I've seen it in heats and heats. Like Outer Island kids have it way harder trying to compete on Oahu because they're all Oahu judges, and they see these other kids all the time, these other young men and women that are ripping. And in their eyes, that's like, oh, they know what they're looking for, and they see someone else and they're like, if you don't have a sticker on your board too, that can write you off. I think sometimes with me, it's like, wow, he has success in all these other areas. Like, let's not give it to him. The proper
he doesn't
score.
need this.
He doesn't need this. Which is just annoying because if it was just fair and easy, it's just, at the end of the day, that's all we want. Like, that's all I want, you know? I want to be able to truly tell my barometer how much better I can get. And maybe if I did do good enough in the regionals, I would go full Challenger. I don't know, you know?
Yeah.
I obviously know I got to get better. I'm always trying to get better. But it's like really challenging. Like, you know, it always goes a certain way. It seems to always go, you know, Oahu kids, North Shore kids, you know, people that work out in the gym with them. It just sort of does, you know, it's very obvious. And then the Outer Island kids totally just don't. It's like, oh, well, better luck next time. We'll see you in 7 months.
Yeah, gosh, it's so brutal. But yeah, I think we're really blessed to be able to surf and not have everything come down to those one heats. Because man, it'd be a tough road, especially if you're not sort of a
trying to make a career.
Yeah,
we're very lucky. We just get to go surf these waves. So you know, no complaints. Sure. It's just, you know, this is minor stuff, but, you know, like to see it improved for this next generation of surf stars or potential surf stars.
Yeah, well, right on. First Swell is done. Your probably last contest of the season, so new beginnings. You're definitely not going to be missing any Jaws swells, I think, because of contests. So
I'm hopefully on Jaws.
Hopefully it ramps up and we'll have a really good season. So yeah.
So psyched. Thanks for listening, everyone.